Welcome sports fans to GenX Classic Sports, where we bring the nostalgia of our sports-filled youth into the present day. Do you remember when football players wore stickum? Do you remember when the NBA played defense? Do you remember when Wrigley Field turned on the lights? If so, then this podcast is for you. Grab your favorite retro jersey, crack open a cold one, and let's stroll down memory lane together. We're here to discuss iconic sports moments, teams, and athletes from our generation. This is GenX Classic Sports, sports talk for Gen Xers by Gen Xers.
Yep. All right, and episode 7, we're going to talk about fantasy football with Steve and Tom. And I've got a question for you guys right off the bat because it's trivia that I didn't know. Which do you think came first, rotisserie baseball or fantasy football?
It's rotisserie baseball, wasn't it?
I mean, I think that would be the logical answer, but I'm thinking it's a trick question.
You'd be correct, sir. Of course, you know how internet research is. No, I didn't go to the library for you guys, but I did try to check multiple sources. I thought rotisserie baseball probably went back to the Civil War or something. I had no idea, you know. Rotisserie baseball, according to everything I found, didn't start until 1980. And why is it called rotisserie baseball? I had no idea. I'm not picking on y'all for not knowing this because
Didn't it start in San Diego or something? And there was something about chickens or something.
You're close.
Yeah.
It started in a restaurant in New York, and the name of the restaurant was Rotisserie or La Rotisserie, and that's where the guys who started it got together and played. So I don't know what rotisserie means other than for you and me, chicken, it sounds like.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, I think you're on the right track that these journalists got together in 1980 in New York, and their favorite restaurant was the La Rotisserie, and that's where they met and played. And what they did was they drafted active Major League Baseball players, obviously, and they tracked their stats over the course of the whole season. So the way I understood it from reading about it was it was not a weekly by weekly thing. It was like, Steve, you draft the lineup. Tom, you draft the lineup. I'm going to draft the lineup at the end of the year. Who had the best batting averages, who had the best pitching, and that kind of thing. They didn't care what happened week to week. It was accumulative over the course. Now, I don't know what happened when they had injuries and so forth, but that's what I read. It was scored by hand, obviously, from a newspaper, from the box scores, and weekly from the USA Today. So that goes back at least to then. They said that they got so much press for the league that they started that every time those same journalists went to a new major league ballpark within just a couple of years, all the journalists at those ballparks were playing rotisserie baseball of their own. And then in 1981, when the Major League Baseball strike hit, the writers had nothing to write about because there was no baseball, so they started writing about their fantasy teams and their fantasy leagues, and so it got in these national and regional newspapers and picked up by people all over the country. Now, my experience with rotisserie baseball was this in around 91, 92, somewhere in there. I had a friend from high school. We were both in college, and he told me that he was running a rotisserie baseball league. And I said, what is that? And he said, well, it's a way for me to make some money. And I said, well, how does that work? And basically he described this, but by then they'd figured out how to score it weekly. Somehow I guess there was a cutoff Friday or Saturday, and then the stats for that week compiled into it. But he got a cut of the pot to run the league because it had to be scored by hand out of the Baseball Weekly newspaper. And that's how I knew what rotisserie baseball was. But since baseball is so old, I assumed it came first. But it did not, apparently. So somebody will tell me I'm wrong, I'm sure. But all right, so let's talk about that's the background for what I thought was going to be the origins of fantasy football, and it turns out it's not. So we all started playing fantasy football, we think, around 1997, right?
Yep.
And we just had our draft in 2024. So ever how many years that is, that's how many years we've been playing in the exact same league together. And we are the last 3 members.
Last 3 originals.
We started with 10 or 12, and it's down to us 3. And pretty much now everybody in our league's kin to each other, basically.
Very, very inbred.
Very inbred league. So, Steve, you started this crap because you got Tom and I involved. We were huge football fans, as we've already established. You you came to us with this idea in '97 or so when we started working together. How did you get involved in fantasy football?
Originally, it was through newspapers. It was the USA Today. I was working at a savings and loan, which is not in existence anymore, in downtown Little Rock.
You did a good job.
And, yeah, we ran it right into the ground. But
you can't lob them in there like that on this.
In my downtime when I wasn't running the SNL into the ground, I was looking for other things to do, and I read the USA Today every day. And obviously you start with the sports section,
right.
and you read the other crap later. But they started doing these weekly contests, or not, I don't remember them being weekly in the USA Today, but it was fantasy football. And you would go in every week, and they'd give you a salary cap, a fictional salary cap. They'd have all the players listed with a salary beside them, assigned value, and you'd have to pick out your lineup for the week and then mail it into USA Today, and then they'd publish the results on Monday or Tuesday of the next week. And so I did that for 3 or 4 years, and and that was fun, and I thought it was what it was. And then my wife and I moved to Norman, Oklahoma, and I was working for a bank there, and there were some guys there that had a league. And this was in 1990, and if memory serves correct, I remember the first draft, and the guy I really wanted and went one pick before I got it was Emmitt Smith as a rookie.
Man, yeah, the guy's already retired and in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. So I played a couple of years there, and then didn't play for. I think after I left there, it was back to the USA Today, and then when I got to where you guys were at, I think we started talking about NFL and how much we enjoy it and all that stuff. And then the conversation just started. Let's start a league.
Well, I was aware of fantasy football, but I'd never played because I didn't know anybody that knew how to run a league, and there was no way to research it. You just knew somebody who, and I was too lazy, obviously, for all that work it took to do the USA Today one. You hadn't played either, had you, Tom? Was Steve the first time you played with Steve?
It was the first time that I had really been in a legit league, but my first exposure to fantasy football was I was working at a it was youth home, so it was like a facility for kids, and so to keep the kids busy, we did a draft.
Oh, that's
cool. And so and it took a long time, and it kept them busy and
focused on something,
and so but we never played a game or anything. We just did the draft, and then y'all brought it to me, and I was like, heck yeah, I'm gonna draft 2 quarterbacks right in a row.
Yeah,
gotta be. If you got one that's good, 2 would be better.
I'm gonna take the 2 best quarterbacks.
Let me ask
1 and 2.
Let me ask Steve for clarification. So was that a weekly ordeal, or you drafted a team at the beginning of the season and mailed it in?
I remember it a weekly deal because the values changed each week, and you'd have to.
So
pick.
It was much more like DraftKings and those games today.
Yeah, and so they would publish the result. And they would just have guys ranked, and if I may be remembering this wrong, but it seemed like if you finished in the top, whatever, and so this was nationwide, but if you finished in the top 100, I'm going to say, you got a little money or something. But everybody that played, they'd have them listed and ranked. How you finished.
Brown, Little Rock, Arkansas, or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
So you literally wrote out something on paper, licked an envelope, put a stamp on it in the mail, and it got there in.
Yeah, and you had to turn if memory serves correct, you had to turn your lineup in on Wednesday. You had to mail it by Wednesday or something for it to get to New York where they were at, for them to input it all. Yeah, open it, input it all. All us thousands of suckers that were doing it nationwide, and. It was a lot of work for them. I don't remember it costing very much at the time. Good thing, because I didn't have much money. But it was fun. I mean, it was for someone who really had a passion for the NFL. I mean, that just for the first time ever, it gave you entree into, having some control over the game, so to speak.
Yeah, and there may be people listening to this that don't know what fantasy football is. It's possible. And so the whole concept is you get to be the general manager of a team, and you draft a team, you put them out there every week, the best lineup that you can, and they accumulate points for you, and you square off against someone else because you're in a league, and you make a schedule, and you play those other guys, and at the end of every week there's a winner, there's a loser, and at the end of the season there's enough guys to do a playoff, and that's more or less how it works. And then some of the other stuff we'll get into as we go through this. So what year do y'all think fantasy football started? Because I had no idea. If it's older than 1980, so what year do you, it is definitely older than rotisserie baseball, so what year do y'all suspect it must have started? I had no clue, so it's not a bad thing to not know for sure.
73.
I was going to say probably after the merger.
The merger has something to do with it. It was 1962, and the Raiders were in that outlaw league called the AFL.
Yeah.
There was a guy named Bill Wickenbach who was an executive with Oakland. Steve, all roads lead through Oakland tonight.
There we go.
Bill Wickenbach, an Oakland executive, and an Oakland PR man named Bill Tunnell, and an Oakland reporter named Scotty Sterling. They were sitting around in New York City at a hotel, and they came up with the concept of, and it had something to do with them second guessing the draft, and they came up with the concept of how would every man out there, every fan, every person who cares, how would they draft their own team and do any better, kind of thing. So they kind of set some loose rules, and in 1963 the GOPPPL was formed, which was the Greater Oakland Pro Pigskin Prognosticators League. And they met in this Wickenbach guy's house, and it had eight members the first year. And they were mostly people associated with the American Football League, journalists, executives on the clubs, and even some Raiders season ticket holders.
Wow.
And so they did their first draft in 1963. So they got ahead of us a little bit. But that led to all of this other craziness that Steve has kind of mentioned, and some of the other stuff. I've got some good stats on it. And so the people listening that don't know, you have to create a roster, of course. And so listen to what the original roster rules said. You had to have 2 quarterbacks. Now listen to the terminology here because it's important. You had to have 2 quarterbacks, 4 halfbacks, 2 fullbacks, 4 wide receivers / tight ends, 2 kick returner or punt returners, 2 kickers, 2 defensive backs, 2 linebackers, 2 defensive linemen, or the DBs and the LBs could be the same, but so 2 backs on defense and 2 linemen. Which there are some leagues now you can still draft individual defensive players and score for sacks and all that. We just draft teams.
I was going to say there's not 4 fullbacks in the league now.
Yeah, probably
exactly.
not, yeah.
You had to
The
4
entire league.
4 halfbacks and 2 fullbacks. Yeah. And so this league, this GOPPPL, was active at least as late as 2015.
Really? Wow.
So I think they have us beat by a little bit. By the way,
I'm not as cutting edge as I thought.
I know.
how many people do y'all know that have played fantasy football longer than we have? I know one who was in our league originally that played longer than I have, Russell. Russell had played before he joined our league.
That's right, he had.
Because remember, he and his buddies would go to Tunica,
Yep.
spend a weekend and
Yep.
draft their team.
Yep.
Did you know, I mean, obviously you did the draft, but as far as a dude being in a league, did you know anybody that's been at it longer than us? Me.
I don't.
I just know the one guy. And now everybody I know that never played before is in like 5 leagues, and I'm, down to 1 basically. Okay, so that tells you how the game has changed when you look at the roster requiring fullbacks and halfbacks, because no one uses those fullbacks anymore, and halfback terminology is 40 years old now. And so if this little league in 1963 is doing it just independently, how did it get out there to the masses? And the answer to that is, in 1969, one of the members owned a bar, an Oakland sports bar called the King's X. And he brought the concept to his bar and created a public league of the bar patrons in 1969. So whoever was hanging around the bar, they formed a league, drafted, and started their own independent league of this original one. And then what really kicked it off was in the 70s, it hit college campuses. And like everything seems to do, that kind of throws fuel on the fire. I'm going to stop right there with the history and just ask you guys a couple of questions. What is it y'all think we like so much about it? Because we were obviously way ahead of the curve. Why is it the phenomenon that it is now, do you think? Because, we enjoyed the heck out of it. I don't know if we ever saw it being what it is now. But, I mean, we knew we were onto something clearly. But why do y'all think it's so popular? Or what is it about it for y'all that you like? Just what we've said, that you get to draft and make your own decisions? Or, I mean, I know what I would say, but y'all go ahead.
I don't know. I mean, I hate to say this, but it gives me a reason to watch.
That's exactly
games that I'm not interested in.
It makes me watch the games. That's what I was going to say.
It forces you to watch a Browns game because you got a receiver going.
Right.
Yeah, that's somebody that you'd never watch.
And it makes it interesting.
Even though we like football and would watch most likely anyway, it gives you a little bit of an interest in the game itself.
That's what I was going to say. Is it really, if nothing else, it's changed the way I watch football.
Yeah.
Because forever, I've been getting the Sunday NFL ticket for a long time.
Yeah, you were like the first person I knew that bought that.
Yeah, and I got it so I could watch the Raiders games. But we were playing fantasy then too. So Tom and I were talking about this earlier. Is it really gave me an opportunity to, when the Raiders game was on a commercial or whatever, I can flip over to the Steelers game because I got Cordell Stewart going, or whoever, Big Ben's probably better. But, it's just really changed the way I consume the game.
Yeah, and once again, even if you play fantasy football now and you're listening to this, you may not realize, but mechanically the way this happened, I can still see this in my mind. Monday morning, Steve rolls in with a USA Today, was it, under his arm, and you would get the stats on Monday morning out of the paper, and there would be all games considered except, obviously, the Monday night game. And so Tuesday, Steve would roll in with yet another paper. And Steve would hand score, we call it, meaning look at the rules and say a catch is worth 3. This guy had 10. That's 30 points or whatever. And he would square all that up on a notepad or something.
Yeah, notepad.
Handwritten notepad out of the newspaper and score our league and keep up with the standings and everything. And someone's listening thinking, well, why didn't you idiots just use the internet? And the answer to that is it was 1997. And according to my notes, it wasn't on the internet until 97. So we didn't know about it. There were, and think about what would you say, the slow speed in which you got your information. These kids now see a scroll going by. They know every catch, we had no idea until Monday. Yeah. Even if you read an article about the game, you know who scored, but you didn't necessarily know he had 24 carries for 150 yards until the next day, probably.
I hand scored it for years.
Yes.
But I do distinctly remember, when the internet became much more readily available, because I can remember then being able to Sunday night get on the internet after the games, the 3 o'clock games finished, and be able to start pulling some stats from the afternoon games and scoring, so I could come into work Monday morning with scores versus waiting till later in the day when I'm able to pull them all out of the paper.
And I remember that. I remember like the preliminary results.
Yeah.
Getting that Monday. And excuse me.
Yep. You wouldn't have a clue what was, you just, even when it started online, you didn't get real-time stats. That was a big deal too.
Yeah.
Well, so speaking of that, in 1990, the first fantasy games really started appearing in several newspapers around the country. And listen to this. Steve's out there mailing stuff with a stamp. Not these advanced newspapers. You called a 1-800 number and you entered numbers on the keypad to draft and put in lineups weekly.
That technology was too advanced.
Those all that squealing and squawking. Yeah. This says in 85, AOL offered an online league. Well, I don't know who would have played in it because I didn't know a soul with internet in 1985, but somebody had it. In 1987, Tom, I'm looking at 3 news 3 magazines that Tom brought. He keeps his sports memorabilia squared away, and he has fantasy magazines. There's Terry Allen on the cover. He was my first running back I ever drafted in fantasy football. This says 1996 Fantasy Player of the Year, and I had him in 1997. So that's how old that magazine is. And this is Terrell Davis, and this is the 99 Fantasy League Football magazine, and I'm looking at Brett Favre, and that's the 1998 Fantasy Football magazine. We had to go to the grocery store or newsstand or somewhere, buy a magazine, and look up the trends, and heck, you didn't even know who was on the roster, much less who to.
No, you really didn't, because those magazines came out so early.
They came out in April or May sometimes after the draft.
You know what's funny is that I'm sorry, I'm gonna jump in here, but I was thinking the other day, like people have asked me, why does your league draft so late?
Because of injuries.
And because when we were doing it, we didn't have the information at our fingertips. We might be drafting guys
that weren't on the roster.
They got cut, they got hurt, and so we traditionally drafted that night before that Thursday game.
Yeah.
Because of that.
Yeah.
This says in 1987, the Fantasy Football Index was the first magazine founded for fantasy football, 1987. So that sounds about right to me. And then, like I told you a minute ago, 1990 is when Steve was still licking stamps, but everybody else was.
No, I was in a league in 1990.
Okay, everybody else was using a phone, and I thought that was interesting.
1990 was my Emmitt Smith heartbreak draft.
Yeah. And after all of that talk, 20 minutes of that, we just now get to where we all got together, but and it goes fast now. In 1997, CBS launched their online fantasy football site. I remember the CBS one in the late, but saying it launched doesn't mean that you know what kind of functionality it had at all, because it certainly didn't have real-time stats. We started playing at that point, and like I said, you were hand scoring. Do you have any idea how many years we hand scored into? I mean, I know you went to Excel at some point.
Yeah, I went to Excel at some point, but even with that, I still had to go manually get the stats, enter them into the Excel spreadsheet.
We bought software around 2000, maybe. Would you say
it was when? It was after. It was when we transitioned to the league when we were all at Axiom, and so that was probably 90, 91, something like that.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And
and
then, like I said, even though you had
99, probably 99. Yeah.
Even though you had a tool to track it all. I guess I'm not explaining this to the people who may not know very well. Even though we went online, the tool itself did not get the stats until a dump late at night or whatever for Sunday's games, and then you could see the scores. It did not happen as
it wasn't real
time at all. It was not real time at all, and we just take that for granted now. And if I remember my business stuff correctly, one company figured out how to do that, and I think it was CBS that kind of invented how to track real-time stats, and they owned that software or whatever that the ESPNs and NFL networks and all ended up using.
They all had to license it from them,
and probably not anymore. I'm sure they all have their own. Tom, I know you're wanting to say something.
No.
Jump in.
No.
But you remember that tracks with you, right? The Steve and. I remember him going to Excel, and we're like, "Wow, this is
what a great leap forward."
But he still had to look over here and type it in, and look over here and type it in.
But I do remember like putting my line up, having a sheet of paper on a notepad, and putting my line up and who I was playing, and then at halftime, whenever the halftime show came on, trying to write down stats.
Well, you had to know our rules.
Where you were.
You had to have a printout of our own rules so you could know what. Okay, he's got 25 yards. What's that worth?
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
That's one of my favorite memories of all the years, that we've played together was really the first couple of years when, we would go in that conference room, there'd be 10 of us in that conference room, and we're trying to write rules. You guys remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And we would have just knockdown dragouts of, and in-depth discussions of how these rules should be structured, and we need to make this as realistic to the game as possible, and, and all these different iterations. And, it seems like we were always changing rules after, midway through the season or whatever for the first several years, and now we've had the same rules for the last 15 probably, but I mean, that was one of my favorite memories was just, in there and going back and forth and writing crap on the board. And
Agreed.
trying to figure it out.
We won't talk about the two keeper seasons. we won't.
The two keeper debacle.
A keeper is when you draft a team and your league decides you can keep one or two guys and
I enjoyed those
retain
seasons.
their rights. We've done an individual keeper for a long time now, but we tried to go ahead and keep two guys a couple times.
Yeah.
It was a couple of years.
Tom kept a couple
years.
guys. I guess it didn't end up healthy the next year, perhaps.
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
I just remember it was.
I had Marshall Falk during those times, and so I really enjoyed the keepers at that point.
I was gonna say we should do it this year, but I didn't
Yeah.
think y'all would go for it.
Yeah.
Well, listen to these stats, and I'll start kind of wrapping up with this. In 2019, this was a $7 billion industry in the U.S. and Canada combined. I don't know if anybody saw that coming. We should have. I mean, we should have realized it. Of course, it's one of those things. It's one of those industries you can thank the internet and technology for creating, basically. Without hand scoring out of USA today, there's no DraftKings or.
I think it was growing, obviously, but I think the big change, what I remember the big change and the much wider adoption, and it really going, like wildfire, was when the real-time stats became available.
Oh, definitely.
And, across multiple platforms. And, and it just seems like it exploded from there.
It became much easier to play.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the drafts where you could
You
get
draft
a team
draft online.
and
yeah.
automatically or things
Yeah.
like that. And I think more casual players started playing at
Yeah,
that point.
I agree.
So in this $7 billion industry, 59.3 million people play fantasy football in the United States and Canada. 43 million of those are American adults, so most of them, and 45 million. It's up to 45 million now in America alone. And what percentage do you think are male, female fantasy football player, according to this at least?
I think there's more
women
more
playing.
women than there's ever
Definitely.
been. So I would think women probably are in the 30 percentile, something like that.
It says it's 81% male,
Really?
which is that's a
That's
good
about
guess.
right,
I mean,
yeah.
I didn't think it'd be 50 or anything, but obviously there's more playing now than there were when we,
Yeah.
started out at least. And I think that's an accessibility thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many women would be willing at the time to go through the hoops that you had to go through. Who had the time for that? They, that's why they picked on us about it. It's like, why are you going to buy a magazine and do all this number crunching stuff? But now you can just the numbers are readily available for anybody at any time. It's a good way to keep up with the game. That's my opinion on it. You can have a little interest in a game you wouldn't normally watch, and root for. I will tell you this. We joke about our drafts and stuff, and I don't make a big deal out of this, but I swear to you, I've not drafted a Redskin since I had Terry Allen because I hate the Redskins, and I can only remember one Eagle, and that was Deuce Staley that I will not draft Eagles, and I don't even look at them in our list. I don't care how good they are.
Well,
I limit myself in my abilities to succeed.
I'm kind of the opposite from you, where you're not drafting guys from teams you hate. I've gotten to the point where I won't draft any Raiders because it's like if I do, it's the kiss of death for that season.
Yeah, we've got a lot of memories in fantasy football. I mean, from the first draft when a couple of guys drafted quarterbacks back to back, and we probably had kickers going in the third round kind of thing. And I remember a guy, I won't mention his name, that
was last week.
Yeah.
And by the way,
that was just
I think it was me. Yeah.
for the people listening who know about fantasy football and they're like, oh yeah, we just draft online. We still get together in the conference room and draft.
That's the best part.
Most of us. I do remember somebody drafting a quarterback and we all started making fun of him, and he said, but he ran the option in college. This was before dual threat quarterbacks took over the NFL, and there was a running quarterback. There was only one at that time named Randall Cunningham, and this guy drafted one and we picked on him about it. He said, but he ran the option in college so well. Yeah, that didn't work out very well.
That didn't
for
work
guy,
out
by
very
the way.
well. No.
What else about fantasy football, guys?
Well, if you're old school like us, you couldn't pick a guy if you couldn't spell his name.
That's true.
So Tim Biakapatuka was always a tough pick for anyone.
We literally used to have not stickers but a whiteboard, and you had to walk down front in front of everybody and write your chosen player's name on the table. And good luck with a bunch of guys in the room a bunch of project managers and tech writers and whatever, product managers trying to write Tim Biakabatuka.
Yeah.
And Hushmanzada or what?
Yeah.
What was his name?
TJ
Hushmanzada. Yeah, stuff like that. So we had some interesting abbreviations.
Yeah.
TJ Hoosh.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So yeah, it's a blast, and that's about as far into gambling as I need to get. But I do love fantasy football, and obviously about 60 million other people agree. Anything else?
Just how did we not end up making some of that money?
Oh, I don't know.
I mean,
How did we not have any of that foresight?
Well, you know what's hilarious? What's hilarious is we're at a software.
I could have been
company.
Manually scoring it for guys all over.
Guys, we were at a software company surrounded by programming geeks, and it never occurred to us to
get one of them.
Step off to the side and try to figure this out for the. My brother and I used to joke with my dad about it, and we were exactly right. We joked that we missed $2 billion industries that were right in our face that we never considered. Fantasy football being one, and hunting being the other one that blew up around us.
Yeah.
Multi-billions of dollars. Well, Tom, thanks for bringing us the artifacts from the Campbell Museum of Fantasy Football there.
Sure.
Terrell Davis, Brett Favre, and Terry Allen, man. That was my first running back.
3 studs.
Anything else, guys, about fantasy football? We've hit the magic half-hour mark, and we can end it right here if y'all are. We'll get back together. I promise. We'll talk sports movies, and any other Gen X related topics. I've got a million topics, and we can drill into teams, games, athletes, whatever y'all want to do. So we'll get back together in a few months and do it again.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thanks for having
Thank
me.
you, guys.
Thank you for joining us on Gen X Classic Sports, where nostalgia meets the thrill of the game. Tune in next time for more insightful discussions and memorable moments, brought to you by Pine Street Productions. Until then, stay passionate about sports and keep the memories alive.